Io l'ho fatto. Ok. Quindi metteremo il nostro materiale sul sito di AlmaiAI come sempre. Il titolo di oggi è questo, ci parla di questo meccanismo di Ontology Explorer. Saranno con noi Annalisa Pelizza, che sarà la prima a parlare, che viene dal nostro dipartimento Philcom, poi avremo un ospite, diciamo, straniero, anche se ho capito che è stato in Italia un bel po', e Wouter, e poi avremo Aldo Gangemi del FICLIT. Questa è la mia super rapida introduzione, quindi a questo punto lascerei la parola ad Annalisa. Non so se vuoi condividere qualcosa, io in ogni caso ho staccato.
Grazie Riccardo, grazie per l'invito. Devo dire che il mio gruppo di ricerca e io siamo arrivati a Bologna da poco, alla fine del 2019, e quindi proprio prima della pandemia, e ci siamo un po' persi l'eccitazione che di solito accompagna diciamo, il trasferimento verso un nuovo ambiente. Devo ringraziare te e anche Michela Milano per aver suggerito di affrontare questa situazione anche attraverso questo aperitivo di Alma AI. E poi voglio ringraziare anche Aldo Gangemi perché è stato uno dei primi colleghi che abbiamo incontrato a Unibo e che ha diciamo, raccolto con entusiasmo la sfida di far dialogare gli studi sociali della scienza e della tecnologia diciamo, in cui il nostro progetto si inserisce, è un ambito ancora poco rappresentato in Italia, con diciamo, gli studi sulle formalizzazioni ontologiche di cui lui è una figura di spicco. Condivido il mio schermo. Ok.
Prima, quando parlavo del materiale che avremo messo a disposizione, se poi vorrai darmi anche le presentazioni, ovviamente condividiamo
Volentieri.
anche la stessa
Volentieri.
cosa. Ok, grazie.
Ok, e quindi diciamo la presentazione che faremo oggi riguarda un aspetto semantico forse meno rappresentato nel mondo AI, cioè la necessità di comparare modelli di dati tra diverse organizzazioni, anche ai fini dell'interoperabilità semantica. Il progetto IRC Processing Citizenship che coordino ha sviluppato un metodo e uno strumento a questo fine, che è appunto quello che abbiamo chiamato Ontology Explorer, e la presentazione di oggi sarà dedicata proprio a questo strumento, il cui codice e interfaccia applicativa sono resi pubblici open access sul sito del progetto Processing Citizenship e su Zenodo e OpenAir. Quindi se volete collegarvi al nostro sito, troverete l'Ontology Explorer nel menu e potrete voi stessi come dire, testarne il funzionamento. Quindi, prima di procedere alla presentazione del metodo, permettetemi di introdurre velocemente il progetto Processing Citizenship, nel cui contesto è nato l'Ontology Explorer, e poiché non tutti parliamo in italiano, permettetemi di passare all'inglese. So, the Processing Citizenship Project has been founded for 5 years by the European Research Council and now is hosted at the University of Bologna, University of Twente. I am the PI. I'm a professor in social studies of science and technology and data infrastructures. In Italian context, I'm classified as sociology of communication. Other researchers in the team are Chiara Loschi, Lorenzo Olivieri, and Wouter van Rossen, who's a PhD candidate at the University of Twente, and he has implemented the Ontology Explorer. The overarching goal of the Processing Citizenship Project is to investigate what we call the co-production of people at European border as aliens. They're produced, they are enacted as migrants or aliens, and the co-production of people and European polities. Which co-production, I mean that in the moment in which people at the border are identified and registered into information systems, they're not only represented, but enacted in specific ways. So, and it's not only individuals, it's not only people who are enacted, but also specific understandings of Europe. I will explain this point in a second. Let me just say that with the notion of processing citizenship, I refer to the interplay of data infrastructures, information practices, and bureaucratic procedures that indeed co-produce individuals and polities. One of the main tenets of the co-productionist paradigm is the ability of methods for knowing populations to shape or even to enact those same populations that they claim to represent. And this is surely true of methods to know people who cross borders. Such methods usually rely on digital databases, against which border officers check whether the person who's trying to enter a national jurisdiction or a supranational jurisdiction, like in the case of Europe, is already recorded in one of those systems and why. For example, they want to exclude that someone entering the country has already asked asylum in one of the European member states, as it now is asking asylum in another. And such databases are developed at the national level, like the CS system in Italy or the Register of Foreigners in Greece, as well as at the European level, which now counts 3 databases that are most used at the border, like Eurodac, VIS, and SIS+. 2 systems under development, the entry exit system and the ETIAS system, very similar to the American and Australian systems. And that there are systems used by Europol and Frontex, like EURA. So we at Processing Citizenship are aware that such databases don't limit themselves to represent people who reach the border. We know that these databases make people, enact them. For example, being entered in Eurodac makes you an asylum seeker. Being entered in the Greek Register of Foreigners makes you a migrant. Being entered in VIS, which is the system used to grant visa, makes you a visa traveler. Or when it comes to SIS2, which is a system used to track whether criminals try to cross borders, being entered in SIS2 makes you a criminal. So I can tell you, for example, the case of a woman whose registration I followed at the Turkish-Greek border. The woman was being registered at the registration center in Phylakio, and she was her data were going to be inputted into the Greek database. During registration, she was asked about her profession, and she was a school director. Well, the asylum officer, the registration officer, could neither find school director nor teacher in the scroll down menu of the Greek register. So these professions were not provided for. They were simply not provided for in the scroll down menu. And as a consequence, the lady's profession was registered as other. And that was the moment in which the lady stopped being a school director and became a migrant. So her profession was not part of her identity anymore, at least not in the way her identity was recorded in Europe. Not the way her identity was recorded and then passed through countries in Europe. So this is an example of how databases perform identities, how they enact people. I don't merely represent them. And to be a bit more systematic, I can tell you that databases can enact populations in 2 ways. The first is by making assumptions, and the second is by silencing some aspects. So by making assumptions about people, this is, to give another example, this is the case of the SIS2 database, which, as I said, is used to record people who have some, let's say, legal pass, criminals, but also people who try to cross borders irregularly, or minor administrative irregularities, say. So the SIS2 database requires to indicate whether someone is aggressive. And this is an assumption that someone is always aggressive, that aggressiveness is a constant. It's an immutable trait of personality, while we know that aggressiveness is usually conceived of as a reaction to a specific event. So SIS2 assumes that aggressiveness is a constant trait of people, because you have to tick a box on the system when you record or when you check someone saying that whether that person is aggressive. So this is an example of an assumption that databases make about people. The assumptions that aggressiveness is a constant trait of personality. But databases can also enact populations by silencing some aspects, by not providing some categories and attributes, like in the case of the Greek registry that didn't provide an option for school directors nor teachers. So you see how classification systems and data models that are embedded into databases are crucial to analyze how populations are enacted. So the comparative semantic analysis of data models is one of the main goals of the Processing Citizenship project. So we aim to analyze how border crossers are enacted in Europe as migrants, as irregular migrants, when they are met at the border and are registered in national and European databases. And we aim to see how diverse authorities running these databases enact populations in different ways. This is what I mentioned before with the co-production of people and polities. I will tell you more about this in a minute. But in order to conduct this analysis, we have developed a web tool and a method, which we have named the Ontology Explorer. The Ontology Explorer is a method that combines existing software and web tools in novel ways. It's novel as an integration of insights from early infrastructural studies on classification. Some of you might be familiar with the work by Susan Lane-Starr, for example. And they combine this work with and then extend it to data and metadata-driven infrastructures. Wouter will explain the functioning in details in 5 minutes. But before that, let me discuss 3 principles of the Ontology Explorer as a methodology. First, the Ontology Explorer is thought to conduct an analysis of the data models, which are the formal encoding of an ontology in a database. And data models allow reconstructing the ontologies. We could see them as the discursive model of a domain. We consider such ontologies a meta layer of data for the observer, which reveals the assumptions that are made about people and the possibilities that are excluded by design. So the 2 examples that I made before, the permanent character of aggressiveness as an assumption, or the possibilities that are excluded, like in the case of the school director. Using a vocabulary derived from actor-actor theory, we say that through this method it's possible to apprehend how people are inscribed in information systems. And this is the first principle that we adopted to design the Ontology Explorer. The second one concerns the comparative nature of the analysis that can be conducted thanks to the Ontology Explorer. Differently from ethnographic analysis that is said to be thick, we deal with thin data. So data models are extremely thin. We deal with categories, we deal with attributes that per se don't appear to hold much meaning. We might find a full list of professions. If the category is profession, we might have a full list of attributes. like in the case of the Greek database, but this wouldn't be very meaningful in itself. So it's only when in the concrete use, when the officers run into a school director, then exclusion becomes evident. So in other words, meaning emerges from comparison. And the meaning of categories and attributes stems from their presence in some databases and lack in some other databases. So this is what we're looking for, what is present in some databases and what is lacking in some others, and what can we derive from that. Also, with respect to actual use, as in the case of the school director. And this is why the Ontology Explorer was thought to support the comparison of data models between different databases, like SIS2 and Eurodac, but also between national and European databases like the Greek and Italian ones on one hand and Eurodac on the other hand. So one of our leading questions indeed is how national and European authorities or how national and European polities differ in the way they enact migrants. And it might not be difficult to see the geopolitical implications of this question. So this sort of comparisons that the Ontology Explorer supports allows achieving one of the goals of processing citizenship, namely following how the enactment of people at the border at the same time entails the enactment of polities like Europe. So thanks to the ability to see that a thin attribute like school director is included in a database, but not in another, the analysis of data models reveals authorities' own imaginaries about foreign nationals. Think at a system that asks for language. Let's say that the Italian system asks for language and the Greek system or the European system distinguishes between native language and spoken languages. In one case, the Italian case, people are considered monolingual, while in the European or the Greek case, they are considered polyglot. So comparing data models, it's a way to see the different imaginaries of the polities about the other, its own alterity. So a method that analyzes data models used in these diverse databases and able to compare the imaginaries of different authorities about migrants is what we were looking for. And when it comes that these polities lie at different scales, like in the case of member states and Europe, then I think as I said, the geopolitical implications of this comparison are evident. So as I anticipated, a similar analysis is helpful to study the co-production of people and polities, especially when it comes to the division of labor between member states and European agencies in the European supranational system. In a book chapter, Wouter and I had written, and it's about to be published, we describe how different, so for Greece, for example, collects many more data than European systems, and that constitutes a kind of filter. So many more tasks are impinged on Greece, while at the European level has more high-level tasks or supervision. So this is what I mean with division of labor, how these systems also speak for the distribution of tasks between nations and some member states and other member states, or between frontline member states and European agencies. And finally, the third principle of the Ontology Explorer is that it allows accounting for resistance. If we adopt the jargon of alternative theory, the analysis of ontologies through data models reveals imaginaries or scripts of intended people So assumptions, as I said before, about people who are crossing the border. Yet actual people crossing border can adapt to such assumptions, or they can resist them. And this is the case of 17 persons crossing the border in Sicily and declaring to be siblings. I personally attended this case. So by declaring to be siblings, because basically they started their journey together, these 17 persons contested the Western understanding of family and therefore resisted the definition of family that we might take for granted. So producing script analysis of intended people allows conducting further ethnographic research where practices of resistance exerted by actual people emerge as a contestation of authorities' ontologies and data models and classifications, and not just in a vacuum. Okay, so these are the three principles that we kept in mind while designing Ontology Explorer. And I leave the word to Wouter van Rossum to describe the system in more details.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. I think I hear an echo myself from somebody. Normally you should see my slides. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, thank you for this opportunity to present this work that we've been developing, this method and this tool, which we call the Ontology Explorer. So my name is Wouter van Rossum. I'm a PhD student at the University of Twente in the Netherlands, where I'm now based as well. And so I will explain the methods and the tools specifically in more detail, and also give a bit more detail and also context and how we use it to investigate these relations between information systems, data models, and let's say their world-making potential. Yeah, given the audience, I think it's also wise to recall these definitions that I use in the presentation of ontology and data models. So as Anita also mentioned, the term ontology will be used to refer to abstract set of concept categories and relations. So the domain of knowledge, let's say. And the term data model refers more to the materializations of those ontologies. So more formalized conceptualizations. So this might differ from some of the definitions that people have in the audience. So I hope that clarifies it a little bit. And so the assumption is that we can analyze these semantic classifications used to identify people, the data models, and that these allow us to reconstruct the ontologies or the discursive models of the domain. And so one of our starting points was how we can retrace the choices made in how knowledge is represented in order to better understand how these systems enact people, as Annalisa explained. And so the method allows comparing data models so that these meanings can emerge. Now for this presentation to explore, I will use first an example project, which I thought might be interesting, easier to follow, and also using more open data that could be replicated basically by everybody. And also very relevant to the given current situation is to use these passenger locator forms, for example, that have been introduced recently, as they contain data models that are interesting to compare. So as you may know, these forms are used by public health authorities to facilitate contact tracing in case travelers are exposed to infectious disease during their travels. I think it's an interesting case to explore since they are also not very standardized and different states created their own formats. So I will use it as an example to show how our methods, how we would use our method to then explore how people are enacted as travelers or potentially risky travelers. So the first step, of course, is always to collect some data about it's a domain that we're interested in. So in this case, I start to collect some of these forms that can be found on the internet. So these are all kind of PDFs. I can take screenshots of web applications in order to collect, let's say, evidences of the data models. And the difficulty then is that they are defined in their own ways and they are not immediately comparable. So that's one of the first major points of our methods, is to make them comparable. So to give an example, these are the different kind of forms. They're a bit collage. So it's, for example, from the Netherlands, and the Italian one is here. It's from the World Health Organizations. And so they are in diverse formats, and we want to make them comparable. And the first step in this case is a data coding that we do. So in our methods, we have several actions in this first step, which we call in vivo coding, harmonizing codes and grouping documents, and also some value coding. So this would lead to, let's say there is one PDF document, let's say, that I start coding different kind of categories of data that are found. So this is sort of evidence of the data models from different documents that I can try to harmonize these codes into more meta categories that would allow for some comparison, and also collect different kinds of documents into one document group, which is representative of something that you want to analyze. For example, one system or one national authority. So in this case, one of these forms, I will use one of our qualitative data analysis tool in order to code the different categories of data that I find in these forms. And then I will start also to harmonize all these kind of codings. So at the top, you can see an example of the World Health Organization or the International Civil Aviation Organization form. And all the categories are labeled. And here at the bottom is, let's say, how these different codes for flight route number are grouped in a harmonized code in order to make it comparable. And then the next step is to start analyzing these this data, and there are a few questions that we want to ask. So we have 3 analytical categories, as we call them. We look for presence, absence, frequency. So for the presence and absence, we intend to address sets of questions such as whether a category of values used in one system is also present in another system, whether some categories are native or peculiar to a specific system. And then by focusing on frequency, we also want to address questions such as in which system specific categories and values occur more or less frequently. So let me now quickly first show you the tool on our website. So we provide a demo which can be found online. And here I added the option to load this sample project, which I just described. So I will explain more what is actually happening later, but I can only show you a little bit how we might use the tool. So for example, I might have this question of, well, I'm in the Netherlands and you are in Italy. So what is, for example, different of these forms. And for example, it can show that, well, this seat number was not included in the Netherlands, neither are symptoms for some reason, in fact. We can also get all the categories that are in both of them. So these are, let's say, the more important ones, we might say. So date of birth, last name, family name, signature, root number seem to be common between them. And then we can also visualize this in a network. So this would give us the same information, but also for example, we can see some clusters, for example, that, yeah, there's a lot of personal information that's being collected, but also about the travel information, purposes. And some are only include, for example, also in the Italian, such as address for self-isolation, etc. So let me return to the presentation again to explain in a bit more detail what happened. So I uploaded, let's say, a data set of this coded date of these coded documents, so all these codes and harmonized code groups, and from this we create a co-occurrence network. So we have nodes that represent different elements, for example, a category of data, document group, and then links that represent occurrences of these different nodes. For example, a category nationality is present in data model X. Then these operations that I was able to do in order to, for example, see which are present in one and not the other, we operationalize by using set operations. So we analyze the subgraphs through set and graph theory to compute these additional insights about presence and absence. And so we translate, for example, this to the union, the difference, and the intersection, which you also saw in the tool. So we might want to know which are included in all of them. Then we might use union. We might only be interested in which kind of categories are available only in one system or the other, or which are included in both of them. And then the visualization can also then be used to visualize this relation of presence and absence, and also frequency. For this, we use the force-directed network graph layouting algorithms. Or when they become too complex, we can also use mathematically defined measures of that can indicate significant nodes, groups of nodes, or network structures. And so in this way, the technique allows us to make qualitative observations about the relationship and the structures in the network. So as you might know, this the force-directed graph drawing algorithm, it positions these nodes and then uses sort of force of attraction and repulsion between nodes to position them. And in this way, we can also visually analyze frequency, presence, and absence. And also, for example, they are grouped together based on string similarity. So codes that have similar are also somewhat grouped together like that. Oh, I think my Microsoft PowerPoint just crashed. Very sorry about that. Let me very quickly reopen it. Okay, I hope it doesn't happen again. So in the final part of the presentation, I'll discuss some of the findings from another case that we looked at for the border crossing, and also some thoughts and reflections on the methods, and maybe some question also for you. So 2 illustrative applications helped us assess the use of the methods to analyze these ontologies used in information systems that are aimed at identifying and registering people at the border. And we have 2 research questions that we had to test these methods. On the one hand, how do national and European authorities differ in the way they represent migrants, and also what do the different enactments share? So in this case, we were looking at the diverse databases at EU level and also at member state level to track the mobility of non-EU populations. So here we have, for example, Eurodac, which is an asylum fingerprinting database to support the Dublin regulation. You have the Schengen Information System, which is more about security and border management. The Visa Information System is for the common EU visa policy. And then we also have the national systems, where we have the German and Hellenic authorities. This is based on field work that is done by other members also of the processing citizenship team. And yeah, from these 2 screenshots, you can also again see that there are maybe very different formats. So on the left hand, we have screenshots that were collected during this field work, while this German Registry of Foreigners is more described in very formal documents. So that's in general an important point to make as well, that we deal with these data models that are sometimes hard to access. They're not always openly available. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And they can be in very different kind of formats. So the results then of this analysis can be sort of summarized in this table, which is an excerpt of the table. So the table here has, for example, a row for each code group with in the column indicating if it is present in the respective authority's data model. So we set authorities as independent variables, and then categories and code groups present in data models were joined together by the issuing authority using the set operations. And then we can ask which groups of categories are present in some ontologies, but not in others. And so again, we pay attention to what is not there. And so we can see that authorities can differ in the type and granularity of the data they collect and the amount of control the system allow in adapting for local circumstances. And these differences can help further analyze how, for example, migrants are enacted as persons in need of integration, which a category is only included in the German Registry of Foreigners, or their family relations are enacted. The Hellenic Registry of Foreigners seem to focus on parents' data. The German Registry of Foreigners, also family data, includes more about children, parents, spouses, life partners. And for EU systems, these kind of data are not present at all. At the same time, there are also some constants in the way authorities enact migrants. But despite these constants, we can also perhaps see some differences through these measures of centrality. So some are perhaps shared, but still more important. For example, in case they would be connected. We also saw that, for example, in the passenger records, there are certain fields that are maybe shared among them and then are quite important. And so in general, we have these different benchmark criteria, which we also introduced. Let's say what we also think of what it means of what our method is doing in terms of making these kind of data infrastructures visible. So on the one hand, we have this comparability, so it allows us to compare coding schemes developed, for or different systems. In terms of visibility, the comparison of data models allows us to see that there are differences in the kind of categories that are present and absent. For example, some have data about ethnicity, family status, temporary accommodation. There are also differences in granularity of categories. For example, things like names versus another system that has more granular things like earlier and other names, or in terms of education level, marital status. Also how people may be associated across different data models. Also how we can find indications of how they different kind of categories are aligned among each other, or how it allows for certain control or not. For example, languages others indicate that it is possible to have these cases where the value is not available in the, let's say, the drop down, but would still be added in some other ways, for example, for registering somebody's mother tongue. So I want to conclude with a few reflections on the method, and hopefully this can maybe help also for some discussions. So in general, say that some caution must be taken in interpreting the results of the analysis. For example, we also reflected on how network and visualizations we created should not just show some kind of connected complexity, but actually help us understand these networks and the data models. And in that way, sometimes ambiguities in the network analysis and visualizations can be a strength in it, opens sort of question. And it encourages sort of further analysis if there is ambiguity. And so the method can support the discourse analysis of information systems, but we should be cautious to give definite answers. And we also see this kind of approach of assembling what we do with different methodological approaches as kind of interface methods. And again, the tension of combining different methods can also again be productive in that sense. Finally, also what might set us, let's say, or differentiate from maybe other approaches is what Annelies also mentioned, is we are actually sort of using also these ethnographic strategies from going from thin observations to thick descriptions. So for example, a classical example I think is that a thin description of a wink might just say that, okay, it's just a contracting of an eyelid. No, it's also giving more information, and it's this kind of thing is culturally embedded, and a thick description can also take this more expansive explanation of something. So we are also interested in that. We are just interested in finding through the method these special cases. So just, okay, why is this category of data not available? Would then stimulate further inquiry. And also, we are interested in, let's say, the performative or world-making effects of information systems. So we are not just also thinking about, okay, there is a domain of knowledge and this is being translated into some kind of data models, but we're also going the other way, that the data models also shape and have an effect on the real world. So they are performative things. And finally, also, maybe technically in a network, can we also maybe integrate some insights from different fields? For example, the creation of while doing the data coding process is a rather manual process at the moment using this qualitative analysis software. We might take it actually, or we could use other methods that have some automatic processes for extracting categories and grouping this kind of concepts. Also in terms of network analysis and visualizations, maybe we can leverage on other kinds of methods in order to do find these, for example, connected components and label them. I'm also interested in what might be the applications for more AI-based systems where classification is also very important, but it's all sometimes very different because you have a machine learning model that can classify certain things, which works in a very different way. So how might our method work in that case? So that's the end of my presentation. So yeah, we argued for this importance of visualizing this infrastructure because it has a major role in how people are not only represented but enacted. And I showed yeah, how this methodological contribution can be interesting to get novel insights. And also I gave some illustrative uses. And here you can also find again the links to the demo, the source code, and also a link to the project on Zenodo. So I'm looking forward to any questions or discussions. And I think now Aldo and Gemi will take over.
Yeah, thanks, Wouter. Riccardo, what do you recommend as a duration for my final speech?
Usually we are right at around 7 with the presentations, and then we have discussions. I don't know what you want to do, but I think that you may have 10 minutes.
Yeah,
sure. You want to do something.
I'll do as you suggest. I'll try. Okay, so let me share.
After 7, I will untie my tie, right? So after 7, we are done.
It's a no business and
no business. Not after 7. Thank you, Aldo.
Okay. Screen. Okay, let me play. Okay, can you see it?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So actually, I've been invited time ago by Annalisa to act as a discussant on this project. They've been actually delighted in looking how taking just the requirements from a specific domain of sociology in actually prompts an established domain like semantic technologies with very interesting things that are not only just things that are technically different, but actually provides requirements that have not been completely addressed by our domain. So it was a useful surprise, and I will try to convey what I already discussed during my discussant role presentation time ago. I will be quicker just because of time constraints, of course. So let me directly go to my first impressions at the time. So firstly, it's about great news. So Ontology Explorer looks like very relevant domain work that is blossomed from real requirements. And from the point of view of my community of these semantic technologies-oriented AI, is that behind it, there is a lurking cluster of semantic interoperability problems that cover issues in data modeling, conceptualization, knowledge patterns, extraction of new knowledge or hidden one, or ontology design made either top-down or bottom-up. So the requirements and theoretical principles and solutions in the Explorer bear, in my view, substantial similarity to the semantic technology field that covers all these domains. I'm not going to mention them again, it's boring, but also relevant differences, no? And especially the fact that they have used their own terminology, which is perfectly fine, that could be, however, mapped to existing fields of research, and also some research paradigms. For example, they've used basically the basic graph theory, while we have these knowledge graphs that are not just graphs, but they are also graphs. So we'll see something about that. On the other hand, I've seen these very interesting requirements coming from and with associated solutions. For example, the observation that there is a performative, social, and even ethnographic semantics that is partly unexplored in our domain. For example, what happens now when you provide a new ontology in terms of resistance or emerging scripts that then have an effect in the real world? For example, the social effects of categorization and different categorization, the related comparison. They've noticed that in the system of regulations in multiple countries with respect to inclusion and migrants, but this is existing elsewhere as well. No? For example, consider the infamous DSM in psychiatry that has actually forged the way the normalcy of behavior in the past. So there are a lot of studies in the humanities, can start at least from Foucault, but even now, there is quite an active area of research in how do we really understand what is psychiatrically, which categories should convey some therapy or not. This is changing. There is an interesting book just published by a colleague of mine in the Senior Institute I mentioned at the beginning, Sergio Benvenuto, but okay, that's another story. But also when we search positions for in the universities of research centers, scientific areas make it change. You allocate some money in a scientific area rather than another. And this has an important effect, but let alone social norms or political values, of course. So what the Ontology Explorer addresses as similarities to multiple projects. Now, one that I mentioned usually is a project that I'm coordinating called SPICE that deals with data-centric, ontology-intensive methods for inclusion via cultural heritage experience. But also has this issue of putting together the discovery of something that exists in the data, which is not recognized as such. So you clearly need something which is a sort of hybridization of symbolic and sub-symbolic methods that are currently a holy grail in AI, like this excellence network that Bologna is involved, called Taylor. So the bottom line of this first slide is Ontology Explorer is a great case study for the knowledge graph community. Then there is an interest in reusing its graph-based datasets, possibly trying to find ways of making it even more powerful what they have already done. So just to give you an idea of what this means, for those that already don't know, the interoperability problem at the level of public administrations is very important. Now, this is a very stupid example. That's not very important, like migrants, and it's just talking about accommodations in Rome and Milan. Okay, they have two different schemas, and it's very difficult to match them because they use different names, but also different conceptualizations of those names, and then of the data that are shaped according to those schemas. And also, there are issues in how the data are produced. So, for example, why do we need logic and ontology in the sense of being formal methods? Is that you can, in databases, you can put things like those. These are real stuff. Okay, this stuff emerged in a project, in a data lake project with the digital team some years ago in Italy. So you find things like telephone numbers within an email field, which is a data type error. Or you can find the usage of, you put two emails in one record, which is a logical glitch. Or you can find the design limitation because someone wants to express the fact that you have to contact some special guy with respect with an email, and this is not allowed by the schema. Okay, all of that actually shows that at a very, very simple level, we have this semantic problem. And this has not been faced completely. So there have been many attempts to do that, having an institutional semantics that actually complies to minimal requirements, but also to requirements that could be flexible. So you don't be to stay attached to what you are defined at a certain time, but you need to make it evolve according to the emerging needs. Otherwise, cases like ones described by Annalisa emerge. This is another case, all these questionnaires and forms that are suggested to us. Why those, and not others? Because behind that, there is a lot of knowledge implied, okay, like causality or epidemiology or legal constraints when you, for example, want to gather data for a patient history, and some patterns emerge concerning vaccination or sexual preference, incarceration, etc. And this is directly related to the way you want to conceptualize these things. Okay, And also you have the problem of extracting, no? It mentioned, Wouter mentioned on this graph measures, and knowledge graphs offer that as well. So there is this formal logic base, but also the fact that knowledge graphs are graphs. So you can use things like centrality measures in order to extract new data or to understand what are the core patterns of what exists in some set of data. So, and there are techniques here, okay? So what I used during my my discussant role time ago, I tried to, and I'm not going, of course, to describe it in detail because just a few minutes remain. There are techniques, existing techniques, in order to deal with structured data and to perform analysis of them so that you get a shareable semantics, an interoperable one. And there are techniques to extract from semi-structured data, like existing vocabularies, thesauri, tables, catalogs, or even from unstructured data. You see here examples of methods and tools even that manage to produce knowledge graphs out of text. And by the way, one of the key elements, beside all the techniques that allow to do that, is the fact that you should link and link and link stuff. And this link deals with real world. Okay, you are linking entities, you are linking real people, you are linking events, linking organizations. Okay, it is important that these things should be connected across the multiple platforms so that you can get then this interoperability, and also that you can stratify the semantics that you are providing. So there is a difference if you're talking about a physical object or a social object or a legal norm or a legal event or even the cultural values that you are discussing about. And these things, by the way, are related because the semantics of our societies emerges out of this modularized architecture of models and data. Okay, now coming back to the Ontology Explorer specifically, there are important questions like how do we talk about populations, or there can be heterogeneous ways of profiling or classifying people and especially migrants, or what is visible or invisible. No? So you have to be able to extract what is invisible. So if a guy looks as a no category for someone, it creates a problem. Okay, so how to create population knowledge? So there are traditional methods that could be surpassed by digital techniques, but especially by semantic ones. And you need comparative frameworks to do that, because as the Ontology Explorer work notices, meaning emerges from comparison often, not just from the fact that it's expressed by one specific source. And the performative effects of knowledge technologies that are hardly considered in traditional semantic text interest me a lot. Okay, what happens when you are changing a certain model with its related assumptions? What are the effects in the real world? And of course, in this way, by following my reasoning, using ontology design, using semantic technologies, using a bit of logic, helps a lot in grounding in reality what I'm talking about. So linking the actual entity in the world and having a way of describing to distinguishing them, saying what is a part of what is constituted by what is associated, related, or participating in some event is an important thing. That's where on the one side, the logical part comes into aid. On the other hand, there are multiple ways of reasoning with these interpretations. This could be very classical, like extension and intention, but could be very inductive or even based on feature engineering made automatically by machine, like in the case of the most advanced deep learning techniques. And this, by the way, again, can be hybridized. It's not alternative. Okay, I will skip that, but just to mention that what Wouter has called benchmark criteria is more or less the same thing as what we could call functional requirements in software and in knowledge engineering as well. So there are ways of mapping these very interesting terms that they use to what we actually do in our field. I'm not going to describe them. By the way, the slides will be available. And there are a bunch of solutions that can be used in order to empower or even to learn from what Ontology Explorer work did in terms of analyzing data in terms of presence, absence, or the frequency, or something that is present in a schema or missing in another, and having alignment and comparison techniques that are now getting momentum even in our field. And of course, there are a lot of other methods that could be associated to that. And one important issue here is how about the openness and ambiguity that sometimes, by the way, is a value even in when you create ontologies. We have to respect that. No? So traditional ontology design, for example, tends to reject them. But there are ways to take advantage of them and to, in a sense, circumscribe the problem so that it enriches what we are doing. So one thing that is obviously related, especially in Italy, to what we described is the Ontopia project that was a set of an architecture of ontologies that try to express the public administration semantics in Italy. This is related to the project that I mentioned before with the digital team. And the idea is that we have a common language that facilitates data exchange, formal model for both machine and human readability, and paves the way for the creation of data schemas and that are used for modeling and querying this super huge giant knowledge graph of the Italian public administration. And the governance is important. It's actually the main problem. At the time, that certain government decided that the Italian digital agency should do that, should do semantic interoperability. And at time two, this didn't happen anymore. Currently, Ontopia is still an asset in the Italian government, but is not currently enforced like it was at that time. So things could change. No, this happened also in the US and the UK, where they had a lot of buzz about having these reusable schemas and interoperability of data. And for example, some of these super useful data sets disappeared at a certain time. With the Trump government, for example, at a certain point, you got a 404 error with the data of the White House. That's a famous example. I forgot to put the slide here. By the way, okay, I will skip these technical things. And I go directly to take-home messages in order not to take more time from the questions. So the take-home messages is that applying semantic technologies is not straightforward from research practices, because sometimes we need deep empathy with domain experts, understanding existing methods, resources, and data management habits. And Ontology Explorer has a peculiar ability of actually operationalizing this requirement from a domain-oriented viewpoint that gives us a great advantage in starting from that instead from just natural language general questions. But in that way, modeling and data management patterns would emerge very soon, and so life could be easier in principle for everyone. Different paradigms like knowledge-based, but also machine learning and software and web engineering, human-computer interaction, which is often considered a lesser child, what is extremely important because it contains actually the foreground semantics for people, need integration. Okay. And multiple data with different structuring bear a common semantic. So the idea is that the semantics is in the humans, in the action that we do, and in the politics, in the positions that we take. And it is our task, basically, in computer science, to try to disentangle those things, making differences, gaps, conflicts, and agreements pop out, and then making the advantage of that. Okay, so that was the sort of resume of the discussant's role that I had. And then I leave the ground for you. Thanks. Let me move the. Okay.
Grazie, Aldo.
Prego.
I don't know whether you want to say something about what Aldo commented on your work, or whether we should solicit some questions, because I don't know. This is up to Annalisa and Rossum.
I can wait for some questions, otherwise.
Because I have one, if nobody else has one.
Oh.
And it would be terrible because it would be an engineering question. But I see that also Michele has one, so we'll keep mine for the. Okay, Michele is here, so.
Hi everybody. So thank you, Annalisa, Rossum, and Aldo for the very interesting talk. So I have a question basically related to the last, so to the comment of Aldo. So concerning moving this ontology concept on other domains. So is it, how long, can you imagine how long does it take if you want to take the work that you have done in this setting to another one, like an industrial one, or the example that Aldo was doing? Is it, kind of starting from scratch? Is there some part that you can automate? Is there some part that you can inherit and it brings less effort? So is there a methodology for for doing this kind of transfer of what you have done to another domain?
So it's a question to me. Thank you for that. Yeah, so we try to provide this methodology, let's say, and structured approach to really, it could be applied to all kinds of domains rather easily. We do maybe make some assumptions. We assume that we always just have categories of data which are described in some kind of models, which doesn't have to be structured, unstructured. We mainly have worked with this kind of very unstructured data formats. So in a sense, I'm actually not taking into account so much, let's say, if you would really have an ontology to compare it to something that's only described in some screenshots, let's say, another extreme. But it would be possible and wouldn't actually be so much work either. It mainly depends a little bit. On the one hand, there is some manual work that we have now because we are doing it using qualitative data analysis software that arouses because of, yeah, we are more in a social science setting, I guess, and also because the type of data that we were dealing with is not so much that they are big, but they were just hard to sometimes retrieve. So if you would deal with bigger data models for very complex organization or something, maybe it would be more interesting to also apply some kind of automated tools. But in general, it can be applied, yeah, quite easily, I would say, to any kind of domain. And that's what I also tried to show in that demo. I think that one with the passenger locator forms, I just took just one afternoon. I can do that, you know.
Okay.
And that's actually quite interesting.
Thank you.
Just to give a bit of background how we collected data, because I was directly collecting it. So as you can imagine, collecting this kind of data models about very sensitive and field required quite some works, and that was the major problem. Also, and together with the fact that we collected them in different formats. So getting technical documents from the police might be very tricky. But if you are there at the hotspot, so the registration center, and you ask to take screenshots of the monitor, what passes through the screen, that is perceived as completely doable. So that was our way. It's an ethnographic node that I'm adding. So the same information might be say coded into a technical document or into a screen, but the first is considered sensitive. The second one, we were left together with we were left alone with the computers. So we could have taken even personal data, which we don't, but to show how sometimes you have to play with this kind of perception of what is considered sensitive and what is not. So other less sensitive fields would definitely be easier, I would say. That's why we use the Atlas TI and we code it, because we have sometimes technical documents, sometimes screenshots, sometimes we have templates, and therefore we need to harmonize this. But in non-sensitive fields, it's much it would be much easier.
But sorry, Marisa, but from a legal perspective, is it the same? I mean, that there are distinctions between a technical document and a screenshot, or it's just a matter of sensitivity of the people that are there. So from a legal perspective, I mean, it's the same thing, right? If you take the document or the screenshot.
Yes, I mean, we have a quite detailed ethical plan that I was required to establish before the starting of the project, and we have a data management plan. So basically, the principle is what the informants consider to be shareable. They have to to make explicit the conditions under which they share them. So in principle, a technical document and a screenshot are the same from a legal perspective, as long as they grant access to it and they explain the conditions.
Okay, any other question? So I think I may go with my own question, and which is just the question from an engineer, because when I see something which is called Explorer Analyzer, I wanted to put it into a design flow, not just to be analysis, but I want to make something useful. I know that understanding things is useful, but and recently there's a lot of discussion about the recent proposal for a regulation on AI put forward by the European Unit. I'm pretty sure that everybody knows about that. But let me read paragraph number 3 of article number 10, which says that training, validation, and testing data sets shall be relevant, representative, free of errors, and complete. So let me focus on this: relevant, representative, free of errors, and complete. I mean, beyond the fact that they must be free of errors, and this is a nightmare, of course, this is just a lawyer could write this, but let's think about relevant, and the other one was, sorry, representative. Do you think that your method, or an extension of your method, or an automatization of your method, or whatever, I mean, something starting from what you have done, can help us giving a criterion for a database which is representative, for example, of a very sensitive reality like the one that you modeled, just to give us some guidelines, because at a certain point there will be litigations of that, and there will be engineers that made up the software and some company selling it, and there will be somebody else asking for some kind of damage and so on. And so they will begin speaking about liability and so on. Do you think your method can be of help in this case? I know it's a practical issue, but
I think we might go back to, well, to begin with, how is this relevance or representative defined? And perhaps we can only find if it is representative or not, again, only through comparison with something else, because I don't know how you would define it otherwise. I'd say, how can you have a really comprehensive specification of what it means to be representative?
I mean, the old regulation in this point is a nightmare from my point of view, because it is filled of undefined terms that everybody will discuss on, of course, and lawyers will make a lot of money out of it. But beside this, probably you can be a definition of representative, for example, by using your graph and your ontology and saying what's a central node is, what is not central, and so on. This is what I was imagining. Can you think it can be done?
Can you explain it a bit more?
So
with the centrality?
Yes, I was mentioning centrality just because this means that, I mean, I've studied centrality for the networks of distribution of electrical energy, so I have a completely different background from this point of view. I'm sorry, but of course, there are the measures of centrality you're using indicate where some nodes is important in a network, at least for as far as the connections are concerned, right? So probably to be representative, you must include the node you find in many forms you scanned and analyzed with your method, and so on. So I was just imagining this is a possible application, but I don't want to say anything. I was just looking for your opinion on that.
May I say something?
Oh, of course.
Maybe what they're doing exactly that. So when they say that semantics emerged from comparison, they are trying to tell you that once you analyze the different models, the different categories that are implicit or hidden, actually they're not hidden, they are explicit, but and they do not fit, or they do not fit with the data, because the real data, the people that are there and say they are a certain kind, then you can arrive at something which is more complete and more explicit. And this is actually what happens all the time. So the completeness is not of this world. Okay? Perfection is not. So there won't ever be the final model. You have to consider it as something evolving based on what happens, based on what happens at the legal level, at the institutional level, but also at the level of people that define themselves. So maybe I interpreted you well, but it is something that I share deeply. That's why I wanted to.
So the first version of my question was, can it be translated into a design guideline? For example, when you mentioned the problem that there was no school director in my drop-down menu, of course, you can put a design guideline that says if it is not in a drop-down, you have to have other, but when you select other, there should be a pop-up saying what other, and give me a string. And this can be a guideline that naturally is implied by what you said about this case. So,
if I may, I would call it second level objectivity. As Aldo was saying, you compare different rationales, different logics, different epistemic cultures, and then you try to get out of the nightmare by analyzing it. That's what we have specialized in years. So try to become rational about the nightmare, let's put it that way. So making the second level or meta level your form of objectivity.
So before the lawyers do it.
Yeah, the lawyers produce a lot of semantics, but they have a different pragmatics. But by the way, I think that what happens already in science, for example, is typically that you compare different theories. You try not to maximize the effect that you have with the impact that you have of your theories based on the results. But sometimes with society is a bit more difficult. No? That's why you have we have this epistemic nightmare that has to, and actually it's not a nightmare, it's the richness of our societies. So we should work against those that try to fix these things and forget and about that, right? Against fixations of bureaucracy. And there are methods for doing that, okay? So it's operationalizable.
Yes, I wanted to thank you, Aldo, for this notion of operationalizing empathy. May I use it as a title?
As you like. I will ask you for joining up something that we are doing about this comparative ontology task.
Oh, by the way, what I forgot to say at the beginning of my question was I find it fascinating even if I don't understand exactly what you're doing. But so I should have been the starting of my question, but I forgot. So thank you very much for the answers. Any other question from the audience? Actually, we've come up to 7:30, so.
Yeah.
So seems nobody else has anything to ask. So let me thank you very much because it was very, very interesting. If you are so kind to send me the material, I will upload on the website your 3 presentations, so that will go along with the registration that I will download from Teams automatically. Okay.
Thank you. And Riccardo, if I may, if someone wants to try to test the Ontology Explorer, it's open access, accessible on the process citizenship. So just
great.
Also for other applications, whatever.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you, and
thank you.
Next Wednesday at this time. Bye bye.
Riccardo, I owe you also past presentation from some old.
Yes, you too.
Yeah.
But this is a playground. I mean, we are very free, so nobody is going to complain about anything. But I'm still waiting for some of your presentations. Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Grazie.
Grazie.